Shalom. So, because of the PVK Discord, which I highly recommend everybody join, Paul Vanderklay, we've been having discussions, and a few people asked me what exactly I believe and what my journey was and everything, and so I decided to make this, and it's not going to be like one of my normal videos, so here goes. This kind of journey started with the Peterson Slavoj Žižek debates. Now, Žižek said something which is, I mean, I've heard a lot, but when Jesus was on the cross, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And Zizek said that this showed that on the cross, Jesus was an atheist. Okay, and for the first time in my life, I looked this verse up, and I realized something which was really, really shocking to me. Now, if you notice, this is Psalm 22:1, right? And this is the psalm which that quote is from, right? Lamanetzeach al ayelet hashachar, mizmor leDavid, Eli Eli lama azavtani, rachok me'yeshuati divrei shagati. And what is really clear to any Jew is that when you refer to this psalm, you're not going to call it Psalm 22. You're going to call it Keli Keli Lama Azavtani. That's the name of this psalm, because obviously Lemanetz, or you could call it Al Ayelet HaShachar, but honestly, these are the instructions. Verse 1a is the instructions to the chief musician, and then the beginning of a text is what you call it. In Hebrew, we refer to Genesis as Bereshit. Why? The first word of the book of Genesis is Bereshit. Same thing with all the other books of the Bible. Well, the Pentateuch, although it's pretty much true. That's how we refer to pieces of the scripture, by the first line. So what became really clear to me from the context was, no, Jesus did not say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The proper translation of that line is not Jesus said, it's Jesus recited Psalm 22. That's the translation, right? That's how I would translate from, obviously it's in the Greek now, but if it had been written as a Hebrew text, and I was translating it today from the Hebrew to English, I would translate that verse as Jesus recited Psalm 22 in Aramaic, right? Which is actually a little bit, because the word lama, which is what is used, is actually in Hebrew. It's not in Aramaic, and sabachthani is Aramaic, azavtani is Hebrew. So Eli Eli is the same. The next two, the fourth word, the third word is Hebrew, and the fourth word is Aramaic. So he's switching languages there. However you want to take that, and for me, this was a huge revelation, because it's like, well, I would expect Christians to know that. And so I started looking, and some Christians, very few Christians, do know that. But many, many, many Christians do not know that. And there's a whole debate about it where I don't think there should be a debate. And this is what started me on my path of where I am is, look, I've learned a lot about Judaism. I have a long history studying Judaism. I and part and what I thought I could do was bring my understanding to to Christians who were trying to understand the context of what was going on 2,000 years ago in the Second Temple. And honestly, there are so many different things I could go on and on and on, which people just don't realize or don't know about Jewish history, about Christian history, and so that's where I started, and then I started seeing a lot of things, and I'm just going to go through some of them, but there are so many that I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to remind Christians of Jesus crucified. In my other video, I explained what exactly I mean by that, and I used this image, which amazingly Christ crucified is an image which really I think speaks to what I'm trying to explain, especially um, the Hebrew here. And I don't know if, I mean, so what happens is that he, Velasquez, I believe it is, who painted this, got somebody who didn't really know Hebrew very well to write Hebrew. So, I mean, it 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 shouldn't have been vocalized anyway. Obviously, on a sign, it would never have been vocalized. So whoever wrote it down in the with the vocalizations, which makes no sense. And the first two words, apparently, he actually, copied. The next two words, he didn't really bother so much to copy exactly. So as it goes along, it becomes less and less Hebrew. Um, and that's really a lot of what I see has happened in from Jesus, who Jesus was, and what Christianity has become. These words are pseudo-Hebrew. The first word is Yeshua. The second word is Notzri. The third word is apparently an attempt at Melech, but it's not really legible. And the fourth word, I mean, I guess you could kind of see the Yehudim in there, but these two words are not Hebrew. And anybody who knows Hebrew will tell you, well, they look Hebrewish, but nobody's going to be able to really read them because, like, it's pseudo Hebrew. And so I I I started actually with just the intent of, you know what? So let me give the context, right? And in that giving context, I started learning a lot more about Jesus and about Christianity. I've learned more in the past year about Jesus and Christianity than I ever thought I would. I've read, you know, I've been reading books, and I've come to some conclusions. But for example, I one of the first things I did was go through and look at all the places where Jesus criticizes the Pharisees, because modern Judaism is Pharisaic Judaism. It descends from all the various groups, which there were a lot of, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, Essenes, um, from all the various groups that there were. um, I I decided that's the group which Jews come from. So I decided I'm going to go and um, look at what Jesus actually said about the Pharisees. So I searched out all the words Pharisee in the gospel, and I started seeing that the gospels themselves seem to not have been written by people who understood what was going on, at least to some extent. For example, this I I found this book after I had a discussion with somebody on the Discord server about this, because they're like, oh well, the Pharisees didn't like Jesus healing on the Sabbath. Um, that's obviously not true. One of the big fights between the Pharisees and the Sadducees was the Pharisees believed you could heal on the Sabbath, and the Sadducees did not, and this was a major disagreement. Right? Healing on the Sabbath was one of the ways which Pharisees really and Sadducees would call the Pharisees a would call them heretics and Sabbath desecrators because of that, right? So the idea that it was the Pharisees that were, it's just ridiculous. And of course, I mean, I guessed that there would be somebody who went through, and there was. And I found this book which somebody wrote, and it says that this is the blurb from Amazon. The name of the book is Jesus, the Sabbath, and the Jewish Debate: Healing on the Sabbath in the First and Second Centuries CE. And this is apparently an academic book. And the blurb says the claim that Jesus was criticized by the Pharisees for performing cures on the Sabbath has been continuously repeated for almost 2,000 years. But a meticulous, unprejudiced evaluation of the relevant gospel texts shows that the historical Jesus was never criticized by historical Pharisees for performing Sabbath cures. In fact, Jesus and the Pharisees were in complete agreement for the need of for cures on the Sabbath day. It is also clear that the Sabbath healing events in the Gospels have preserved a significant part of the history of the early Jewish debates, which sought to resolve the apparent conflict between the demands of Jewish law and the performance of deeds of healing and or saving life. This debate, from its Maccabean origins, which, I mean, the whole thing with the Maccabees, the Christian, I mean, there's so much context I would love to pour into this, but this video would be days long. But so you see what, and I just knew this because I have studied the debates and Jewish law, and I know that one of the things which we as Pharisees have emphasized since the time of the Talmud, at least, and actually previous times, as she goes all the way into the Maccabean times, and I as a believing Jew believe that it actually goes back to Moses and Sinai, right? The Pharisaic Judaism is what is the Judaism that we have now, that I believe has been Judaism since Mount Sinai. And I won't go into that whole thing, but so I started challenging these ideas, right? And seeing that Jesus was not speaking against Pharisaic Judaism, which was obviously, a huge revelation to me. And I want to show, actually from the Gospels. This is Matthew 5, starting at 17. This is Jesus speaking. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And I had a Christian pastor tell me, well, so this is another thing that like we really have to understand is one of the things I began to understand is Christians don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. I will pause for dramatic effect. Christians do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. What do I mean by that? In Judaism, when you say someone is the Messiah, that means that we are living in the Messianic era. If you want to say someone is your candidate for the Messiah, if you want to say someone is going to be the Messiah, well, we've had tons and tons of those. I mean, every synagogue has at least one person who's the Messiah like that. That's not what we mean when we say someone is the Messiah. So Christians don't believe we're living in messianic times. The vast majority of Christians, and there's even a name for the belief that we're already living in the messianic times. It's called preterism. Thank you, Sam Adams, for teaching me that word, even though he says he now regrets it. But vast majority of Christians don't believe that. So when you say to a Jew, Jesus is the Messiah, we're going to laugh at you. I'm sorry, because that's ridiculous. We are not living in the Messianic times. So if you were to say Jesus will be the Messiah, well, okay, that's your belief, and I'm fine with that. And obviously, that's what in Acts 5, the Pharisee of Pharisees, and what was really shocking to me is this idea was actually in the Gospels, right? The Acts 5, sorry, it's not the Gospels, but in the Greek Bible. Acts chapter 5, verse 34. But a Pharisee named Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel isn't, it's not a name you guys, you guys, I mean Christians, most people know, but I mean, of course Jews know Rabban Gamliel. He's one of the seminal figures in Jewish history. A teacher of the law who was honored by all the people stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a little while. Now, I won't get into the Sanhedrin and Paul of Tarsus and everything like that, because that's Paul of Tarsus is a whole other thing. But this, in Acts 5, it has Rabban Gamliel, speaking to the Sanhedrin. And he says, "Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to these men. Some time ago, Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed. All of his followers were dispersed, and it all came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census, and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God." His speech persuaded them. Okay? So, and another thing I found out, which was really surprising, is that Christians a lot of them seem to think that Jews believe Christians should be persecuted. No. No. Why? No. And this is recorded in the Christian Bible. Rabban Gamliel was one of the greatest teachers of Pharisaic Judaism. We believe, as Rabban Gamliel taught us, these precise words are perfectly consonant with Judaism, perfectly with Pharisaic Judaism. I mean, I'm not going to say whether I believe. I mean, I'm not sure if Rabban Gamliel said these precise words, and I don't believe he was part of that Sanhedrin. But here is the Christian Bible showing what Jews believe about someone whose followers say he's going to be the Messiah. And like he says, there was Theudas and there was Judas, and I could name so many people, right? Honestly, which Jewish synagogue doesn't have at least one potential Messiah in it? If that's what you want to say, Gesundheit. That's Yiddish for be healthy. Have at it, right? Gesundheit. Be healthy. I wish you well, right? There's no reason for Jews to be offended at the idea somebody has that somebody will one day be the Messiah. That's not the same thing as saying someone is the Messiah. Because if you say someone is the Jewish Messiah, then you're telling me that everything has been fulfilled. And again, what Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And I had a Christian minister who's a friend of mine telling me, well, all the law has been fulfilled, but the prophets have not. That's not what this says in context. So if you want to tell me, as John does, it is finished, well, maybe you should be a preterist. But that's not what Jesus is saying. And if you're not a preterist, I have to wonder, what do you do with this part of the Gospels? And I saw so much of precisely this, right? Matthew 23, where supposedly, the criticisms that supposedly Jesus had, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Right? He's making a charge of hypocrisy. I have no problem with that. No problem whatsoever. Am I a hypocrite? Unfortunately, there are many things I believe I should do that I don't do. Do as I say, not as I do. I should exercise. I should spend more time doing good deeds. I should there there is so much. And to say that the Pharisees are human, are sinners, that's to say for it is not surprising for a Jewish leader to criticize Jews. That is the role of a Jewish leader, is to criticize Jews. That's what it means to be a leader. Well, I mean, not to just criticize Jews, but also to have criticisms and to encourage us to do better and to do more and to be better. That is what it means to lead, right? So I did not find these, the seven woes on the teachers of the law. That they're human. They're human. Why is this surprising to anyone? So the criticisms, the supposed criticisms of Christ, that Jesus had of the Pharisees, of Jews, I don't see it. I don't see it. If you want to show it to me, show it to me. Give me Bible verses. Tell me what it is. But this is another thing that I learned. The fact is that it's not the teachings of Jesus that the Jews reject. There were Jewish Christians. It's the teachings that come afterwards. It's the interpretations. It's the wrong interpretations. Let me give you an example. Matthew 15. There's a lot going on here. This is a story which I, as a Jew, understand. And Matthew, as a Jew, seemed to understand. And Mark, obviously, if you believe that he was actually the Apostle Mark who wrote this, you could, I suppose, believe that he was the actual person Mark. But to me, it's obvious that it's not true. Compare Matthew 15 to Mark 7. And the one line that I want to point out is the parenthetical here. There are parentheses in the new NIV. There are not parentheses, unfortunately, in the King James Version. But verse 19, for it doesn't go into their heart, but in their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. What? That's not in Matthew. It's not there. This is a later extrapolation, and one which I think just completely misses the Jewish context of this, obviously, to me. And what makes it obvious to me? Well, here in Acts 10, we have Peter's dream about eating reptiles, right? And he says no. So when was this? This was way after Jesus, right? After Jesus died. And even here, Peter is not making that same parenthetical remark that's in Mark, right? So another revelation I had is Jesus didn't found Christianity. The things that, I'm sorry, the things that are are being discussed, the Trinity shows up nowhere, nowhere in the Christian Bible. It's not just the Trinity. There are so many things, and if you look back at it, the story that I see is Jesus was a Jewish leader, a Pharisaic Jewish leader, who taught that the law should be kept, and Jewish followers followed him because from everything I've seen, it seems to me he was teaching the Torah. He was teaching Judaism, right? And you know, I was listening to Dr. Michael Brown talking about Torah observant Christians, and he was lamenting how many times he's seen Christians start to take the Torah seriously and drop a lot of what is considered Orthodox Christianity. And honestly, this is another miraculous thing that we're seeing in our days. Large numbers of Christians are turning towards Judaism in ways that is shocking to us, in numbers which are overwhelming the tiny Jewish community. There are large numbers in proportion. These are very small numbers in proportion to the 2 billion Christians in the world and the 7 billion people in the world. But there are 15 million Jews in the world, 2 to 3 million religious Jews in the world, maybe 1 million or so are Orthodox Jews. A tiny percentage of Christians becoming what was called and is evident in the Hebrew Bible, in the Greek Bible, as Jewish Christians who were called Judaizers. And what I started to see was that Christians didn't understand their own Bible. And when I say this, people get offended. And okay, get offended. But the fact is, I am showing you things which you can verify. And they're not convenient to Christianity, but you can verify them. Acts 15. I could do a whole video just on Acts 15. And what happened during the first council of Christians. And how Paul got into various fights, this only being one of them, with the Jewish Christians, right? And Jewish Christianity. And the one thing I want you to take out of this is those people were believing Christians who were following Jesus, the teachings of Jesus as they were known then, right? And Paul did not know Jesus. Paul came after Jesus. And I won't get into it. You can look further. Maybe I'll do a whole video on Paul if people are interested. But the fact is that the entirety of the Christian Bible attests to many things which are obvious to me as a Jew, including the fact that the teachings which we today accept and vast majority of Christians accept, the ones which are most offensive to Judaism are in fact so offensive to Judaism that Jewish Christians never accepted them, including, and they were not explicitly in the teachings of Jesus before he died. Their teachings that people claim to have gotten from the Holy Spirit and from Jesus after the crucifixion, and a lot of them come from many years after the crucifixion, and I honestly don't believe most of them were written by, actual apostles of Jesus. Look, you can disagree with me, but look at the evidence there. What evidence do you have that the apostles themselves believed that, like Mark says, that Jesus permitted all foods to Jews? No. None of the early Christians, not the apostles, not Peter, none of them believed that. And these discussions within Acts and these fights which Paul had was with other Christians. People read the word Judaizer and they think that it's talking about Jews who are not Christians. It's not true. It's actually talking about Gentiles or possibly Jewish Christians. When it talks about the Pharisees after Jesus' time, it's talking about Pharisees who converted, who were believers in Jesus, who were Christians. This isn't the story that people tell us. This is not the story that most Christians know. And one thing that really drove this home for me was the Lord's Prayer. Now, Jesus is teaching how to pray, right? And the prayer, Our Father in heaven, or Father, hallowed be thy name, your kingdom come. And hallowed be thy name, be your name, is something which I recognize very easily because I recognize it from Jewish prayer. Kedushat Hashem, sanctification of the name. It's the third blessing. There are 19 blessings in the Jewish Amidah, which is what we as Jews call prayer. The first one is called Avot, meaning fathers in the plural, not father, fathers in the plural, refers to the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Those are the fathers we are referring to when we say the blessing fathers. The third one, Kedushat Hashem, sanctification of the name, right? And who art in heaven, the funny thing is that it's called Gerurot. It's also sometimes called Shamayim, which it's also sometimes called Geshamim. Geshamim means rains, and it's one letter away from Shamayim, which means heaven. And anybody who's studied enough Talmud recognizes the names of these components. This is a Mishnah from the Talmud, Brachot 33a. And you'll notice if you look on Sefaria, which has a complete translation of the Talmud into English, um, there are um, there are bolded words which are actual translations of from the Hebrew and Aramaic, and there are explanatory texts which which explain all the things that were shortened, right? So I'm only going to read the bold text. One mentions the might of the rains in the revival of the dead, and the request in the blessing of the years, and the prayer of distinction, who graciously grants knowledge, Rabbi Akiva says, is recited in an independent fourth blessing. Rabbi Eliezer says, Thanksgiving. In Thanksgiving. These were known names for parts of prayer. So when I read the Lord's Prayer, I read something completely different. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. I understood it as Jesus says this is how you should pray. Avot, Geshamim, Kedushat Hashem. Fathers, reigns, sanctification of the name. That's referring to particular texts which a lot of Jews have memorized, and certainly back then most Jews would have had memorized. And these discussions, like the Mishnah, which then the Gemara talks about, and then get expanded in Jewish texts, it's a completely different discussion with a huge. I mean, I could talk about the Amidah, where it comes from, how it developed, what the parts are. This is the content of books, which Jesus was apparently not only referring to, but it seems to me that what's left is a very mixed signal, where he says, start with Avot, then say Geshamim, then say Kedushat Hashem. Well, yes, that's what all Jews do. The first blessing is Avot. The second blessing, there's different discussions about exactly which text and what words and what we say in each part, but that's a whole other discussion. And to read this straightforwardly as Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, really? It's this. That's what it is. It's Christians looking at the cross, looking at the Hebrew title above, with the pseudo-Hebrew, hearing, my God, why have you forsaken me? And instead of looking to Psalm 22, they're taking the words literally. That's not understanding Jesus. So if you want to tell me that you understand Jesus better than I do, I'm going to have to disagree. If you don't know what the Amidah is, if you don't know what the parts of the Amidah are, if you can't understand where these words come from, what these words, the Talmud is not a short thing. Studying the Talmud, I actually have some, a pretty strong background in Judaism comparatively. If I were to study the Talmud one page a day, it would take me 3 hours a day to do one folio page. At least. And that's just a cursory reading because of the way it is structured. It would take me at least 3 hours. People who have already studied the Talmud in depth, possibly all of it, will review a single page of Talmud in an hour. Half an hour, maybe as a review, just trying to remind themselves what it says, because you couldn't possibly look at it for the first time and understand it, a whole page, in less than an hour. You just couldn't. And over that time, it would take, if I did it every single day, if I spent 3 hours a day, every day, going through every page of the Talmud, it would take me 7.5 years to complete it. You're just looking at the tops of mountains. You're reading the table of contents, and you're reading the table of contents with the titles of chapters as if that's the book. I mean, just as an example, imagine if I started reading this Wikipedia article on the Amidah, and I started with origin when the Amidah is recited, structure of the weekday Amidah, the 19 blessings, final benedictions, concluding meditation follow-up, mode of prayer concentration, interruptions, quiet prayer, standing, facing Jerusalem, 3 steps, bowing, the repetition. And I started translating this to a different language, and in translating it to the different language, I started trying to explain, trying to make the weirdness go away, right? Origin, when the Amidah is recited, translate that to a different language. It's a complete and utter travesty of translation. It is a complete misunderstanding. It's not how someone can understand what Jesus was teaching, in my opinion. So, when we say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus has been forsaken, I believe. One of the ways, and I'm not going to get into the whole Son of Man debate, because it is one of the greatest debates in modern Christianity. This book is just here, I'll read the blurbs. This is from Goodreads. The name of the book is The Son of Man Debate, A History of and Evaluation. It's a book on the debate, not a book explaining things and debating them. The expression Son of Man used in the Gospels almost exclusively by Jesus, and to my shock, I found out that the King James Version Bible has several places where Jesus used the term Son of Man, and it was changed unwittingly, apparently, to Son of God. Jesus calls himself Son of Man, and what that means has been the object of intensive study since the Protestant Reformation. Yet scholars have failed to agree on its origin or meaning. Because of the scope and complexity of the literature, no comprehensive survey of the subject has been written in the 20th century. This is a book just going over the discussion. It's 192 pages long. just explaining the debate, which is an important debate where I believe Jesus is completely misunderstood. And I honestly, I was going to talk more, but maybe this is where I should stop. I'm saying to Christians, you've forgotten Jesus. You don't understand Jesus. You're wrong about Jesus. And you don't have to take my word for it. But the questions that I bring up, I think you're going to find that they're very, very strong questions. And when I bring this up, I'm not the first person to do this. Many, many people have done this over the years, brought up the same questions, brought up the same things. They've mostly been ignored, not because they were wrong. Oftentimes because they were called heretics. And you can look at the history of the people who were called heretics. I'm just going to leave you with Eli, Eli, lama azabtani. My God, why have you forsaken me?